manufacturing. We need logistics. The company that just bought Schindler Elevator, that's why that building was sold, for a logistics company. So I think we need to diversify as insurance and as protection for ourselves. And for anyone who thinks this board is soft on preservation, I have a chart right here. Since 2012, this board has spent $2.9 million in county funds on preservation to get outside funds of $6.3 million. That's not chicken feed. And we preserve 4,367 acres. So the fact that this board is soft on preservation is a misnomer. And the question should be not how much money you're spending on preservation, but how effectively you're spending those dollars and how much land you're preserving. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the 90s and this is not the early 2000s. This is 2014. It ain't the same. And money's very tight out there, and it's very difficult to make budget. So you have to accept that fact, and we have to work within those parameters.
Vital?
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
Are the amount of money we have allocated to preservation these past few years, 3 years, has been historically low. This is a real shame because this is the time when we should be purchasing easements on farmland when the cost of those easements are cheaper than they will be in the future. We have seen a lack of support, lack of historic support for the agricultural land preservation program and also for the Land Conservancy of Adams County. I would just reiterate that strengthening our farmers and what they do, production agriculture, is the heart and soul of a great economic development program for Adams County. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, question 2 goes to Marty. And because you talked about question 1 so much, I thought 2 would be tough, but we're already part into it. County commissioners are also responsible for the county's workforce. You play a role in hiring and supervising your management staff. How they perform is a reflection on you and the service provided to the county residents. Again, since you all have been or were before commissioners, it's a 6-part question. How did you assess the quality of services when you first came into office? Number 2, what were the results of that assessment? Number 3, was it necessary to change the organizational structure? Number 4, if so, what changes did you make to that structure? Number 5, did the efficiency of services improve over your tenure? Number 6, give us an example. Marty, please.
I think the question alone took 4 minutes to read. When we took office,
We're tough guys.
yeah, when we took office, staff was very nervous. Never before had an entire new board been elected. The previous board failed to complete a few projects, and many large decisions had been placed on hold. Day-to-day operations were running fine, but the county had lost its direction. Morale was low, and public respect for the commissioner's office was quite literally in the dumps. Much of this was due to a poorly implemented reassessment that had happened before. Prior to taking office, as commissioners-elect, Jim Randy and I decided that we need to change this. So we met and began to formulate our priorities. Through a series of discussions, we came up with priorities that we could each support. In essence, any item that was not critical and that we could not support, we agreed not to push. That gave us the ability to take office and hit the ground running. We came up with our list of what we all could agree with. So none of us were going rogue, more or less. It has been amazing how quickly morale improved since we took office and began to take action. And we weren't constantly fighting over priorities that we didn't agree on. We did change a few departments to improve efficiencies. Tax services and planning are the most notable. Planning is by far the most impressive paradigm-shifting change we have made. We merged our ag land preservation, solid waste, and GIS mapping into our planning office. we also added an economic development planner. When we recently hired Sherry Clayton as the new director of planning, it took her about a month before she told us that this was one of the best planning offices she had ever seen. Not just the staff, which I would put on par with any staff in the state at this point, but in the way they were structured to work together. The best example of the success from that office, I would say, is the preservation of the Conawago Chapel this year. This is an example of economic development through transportation as the foil and preservation. We worked with Conawago Township to leverage some of their funds to preserve 2 farms that were side by side, that weren't ranked close enough to the top for both of them to be preserved. And frankly, we didn't have the money to do it. We got them to put in $100,000 of township money because preserving the view shed of the Conawago Chapel was significant to their people. They asked the public. The public liked it, the public agreed. We were able to help them structure that $100,000 over a 2-year period, so they saw no tax increase over this. During the process of this, normally what would have happened was the map would have said, hey, here's a farm we're going to preserve, let's go ahead and preserve it. And Ag Land Preservation would have independently, working with the commissioners, done that without consulting with the rest of the planning department. So nobody would have been talking about the bypass that had been proposed for years to alleviate traffic concerns outside of McSherrystown. If we had simply, carte blanche, approved that farm, we would have effectively stopped that from happening. And McSherrystown, actually we have a council member here, Scotty Bolton, would be inundated with traffic. Now there's actually a path forward. Because we were all sitting down at the table together, and we worked with Conawago Township, we have a set aside within that farm of where PennDOT would ideally like to see that road. Up until that point, PennDOT had withdrawn from the table. They were not working with McSherrystown, they were not working with Conawago Township. Since we came in with this new restructured planning office, now PennDOT's getting back to the table, and we may actually see some relief for McSherrystown and potential economic development there. So, new planning office created preservation and economic development.
The Conawago Chapel preservation is an achievement, and I commend the board for it. It was in the works prior to this board, and I'm very glad this board followed through with it. One of the first things that I had to do with my colleagues, Dick Wainwright and Tom Weaver, when I came into office during the first elective board in January of 1992, is to work to get politics out of the courthouse. The courthouse was kind of an old-fashioned place back then, and a party boss pretty much ruled the roost. If you were a new employee, you would be approached and you would be asked to register Republican. Since the Republican Party happens to be the dominant party in Adams County, it was then, it is now. But this type of behavior was inappropriate in a courthouse meant to serve all the people of Adams County, whether independents, Democrats, or what have you. So we worked hard to get politics out of the courthouse. And we also worked hard to make it an EEOC friendly environment where there was equal employment opportunity, where women, men were all treated fairly, where minorities had a chance to be hired into the courthouse, and so on. We took a one-person human resources department and turned that into a real functioning department. We organized and normalized wage and salary scales and set a very fair and systematic process for providing wage, salary, and benefits. We modernized benefits. We made it a family-friendly place to work. One of the things that has brought me back into the public arena is is and has been my concern for the way things are going in the courthouse today. The courthouse is not a friendly place to work today. Staff is threatened. Staff is constantly looking over its shoulder, afraid of being intimidated, downgraded, or fired for saying something wrong, doing something wrong, taking a position which may be in disagreement with the position that is being projected as the official position. And I really have to point directly to this county manager and what the effect of the county manager has been on the way the courthouse runs. We have very strong department heads all across the board, from the tax office to the mapping office to the planning office to the resource management offices. And all of these people have a seat at the table. We met in work session for 2 to 3 hours every Tuesday, and in voting session for 1 to 2 hours every Wednesday. Both meetings were open to the public, and very detailed minutes were taken. Today, the structure is not a consensual and lateral kind of structure where people are working together, people of different expertise. It's very much of a top-down structure. And department heads find their creativity, the independence of their voice, their ability to provide the best possible recommendation to the commissioners. They find this independence throttled. So this is one of the things that has brought me back into the public arena, and something I'm very concerned about.
Thank you. Randy, same question.
Well, the courthouse I work in on a daily basis is a little bit different than what Mr. Stokes describes it. You're right, it has changed. It has changed for the better. These days, employees and directors don't go to their favorite commissioner and ask for things to be done. You're right, it's run a little bit more like a business, is the way it should be. When you have a $71 million budget and 500 staff members, to have anybody say they don't need a county manager is ludicrous. You know, even small townships of 3,000 to 6,000 people need a county manager. Now, with that being said, I'm going to admit, when we first came in, the county manager had been there 1 year, and there was some difficulty in adjustment to go from a system where everybody went to their favorite commissioner, as opposed to having to deal with the county manager. Does that mean everything is perfect all the time? No. In most companies, that's not the case. But for we commissioners to be out and about, which we are, 7 days a week, including weekends and evenings, you know, you can't be there running the minutia of things that happen on a daily basis all the time, whether it's personnel, whether it's maintenance issue, etc. So there's a good reason for a manager, and I think the staff has largely accepted that change. It's a change for the better. It's a change for the future. So again, Mr. Stokes and I will respectfully disagree on that matter. As far as what we did when we first came in, we assessed management, citizens' needs, office location, staff needs, etc., and we certainly made some changes. As I said before, that we had like 25 departments. They had separate functions, some separate doors, and we actually did some consolidation, which I think was very effective. We asked our planning department to do a study to determine what each department needed regarding space, location, and collaboration. And again, this resulted in some offices moving, being put next to each other, and I mentioned the Veterans Affairs Office, the tax office, and the public defender's office before. The changes definitely allowed the staff to share more training and shared service for better customer service. The one thing we do, and Mr. Stokes mentioned politics in the courthouse and getting rid of it, and we couldn't agree more. What I was sort of surprised to find when I walked in, that they had already gone to utilizing hiring teams. Basically, nobody's hired except in the sheriff's department, I think, without going through a hiring team. And normally there are 5 different people, diverse staff members on that hiring team, and folks go through several different interviews, and the hiring team ranks those individuals. So, believe it or not, I mean, none of we commissioners have that much influence on those hiring teams, and that's how hiring is done. In the old days of patronage in the Adams County Courthouse is long gone, and I haven't seen it. I also wanted to mention, it's small things. Early on in my tenure, I was naive and thought that I would get around to all the different departments all the time and stop in and say hello to people and how you're doing. You know what? It just doesn't happen. Sometimes I don't make it out of my car in the parking lot, much less make it in the door and up the hallway before it's, you know, hey Commissioner, hey Randy. So I said, how can I reach out to staff? That's how this started. And I came up with the idea with my Park Service days with my Park Watch for a TGIF newsletter. And I do that every 2 weeks. It strictly comes, every word is written, comes from me, except for the IT update. And it's a mixture of policy, issues, shout outs, events that are happening. And I did it the first couple of times, and it was just wildly accepted. I got emails from folks saying, Commissioner, you know, we've never seen anything like this in 23 years. Thank you. Thank you for giving us information and recognizing us. And it's remained wildly popular. It's now been expanded to many community members. It also goes on the county website. As I said, it won the CCAP Newsletter of the Year award, and I couldn't be prouder of that. When I'm gone, I'll still be proud of that initiative. I also wanted to mention that our planning department, Marty mentioned it, there's a prime example of consolidation, where it turns out that we brought 3 different factions together, and now they're all working wonderfully, and I think assessing the situation has really helped our workforce in Adams County.
Thank you, Randy. Now, question 3 starts with Harry. Of course, you have the questions. County commissioners are responsible for the general public safety of its residents, as well as the county visitors. At the county level, the focus is on the courthouse guards, county detectives, sheriffs, their deputies. However, Pennsylvania counties also play a key role in the 2 public safety functions, and they are emergency communications and emergency management. Again, since you are, having been in the past a commissioner, what have you accomplished during your term in these 2 public safety functions? Please be as specific as you can.
Well, one of the things that one of my boards did was to buy the bandwidth that is now being deployed today in the emergency management radio system. Had we not purchased bandwidth in the 800 megahertz range, this would not be available today. And this is the best frequency bandwidth that is available for emergency management communication. So other counties, other jurisdictions are really scrambling today, having to buy up in the 900 megahertz, down in the 600 megahertz, because they didn't think ahead. We did, and we bought the bandwidth needed to deploy this system. We knew that it had to be deployed eventually, so we prepared for it. We weren't able to build it then because the technologies were not ready. So I think we laid the foundation, and that house is being built today. That's great. We upgraded and modernized the 911 center. We moved it out of the basement of the courthouse and out to the county facilities center. In building a new 911 center, we also built space to enable fire companies and the police to have, especially the fire companies, space for training. So we built a really full-service training center out there at the Adams Facility Center. And we had room to grow. We mapped out where a shooting range would be able to be accommodated, and we stipulated our intentions to the Strabane Township supervisors and their planning commission, our desire to build a shooting range out there adjacent to the emergency management facility. So this is, when I talk about the foundation we laid, this is some of the foundation that we laid for what you see being built today. And by the same token, we need to be laying the foundation today for the next generation of commissioners, 10, 15, and 20 years out. It's all about really long-term planning. Now, another thing that we did, of course, is to build a new prison. It was pretty heartbreaking to have to spend the money and to allocate resources to a prison, but it had to be done. Our local county lockup housed women in unacceptable situations, just a mere 25 or 30 feet from the cell block where the men lived. The men were in a cell block where they had to be out of their cells because the cells were cramped and very confining. And so you would have your entire male population out and loose in your men's cell block. So one of the things we did was build a state-of-the-art prison. We went through an exhaustive process to locate this Adams County Facility Center, and we see today not only the prison but the work release facility. And these things point to something that I hope to talk about in the next question, which is our need for a new type of criminal justice system and looking forward to what are called problem-solving courts. I think that's a new frontier we have to look at.
Thank you, Harry. I guess we go back to Randy and go to Marty last.
All right, well, as most of you know by now, my 30-year background in emergency services gives me some unique insight, experience, and relationship with emergency responders around the county and around the country. We walked in the door to a 30-year-old analog system that had been patched together with eBay parts, had plenty of dead zones, had no interoperability for different agencies to communicate. It also did not have a variety of add-on features like GPS. I can give you some practical examples like flooding in East Berlin, where we were putting our emergency responders and our families and loved ones at risk with inferior radio communications. I know from 30 years in law enforcement, the most important tool in your toolbox is your radio. We walked in the door, the radio system was the elephant in the room that had certainly been recognized, but no one was anxious to antagonize the elephant or pay for it. As county government, we have no greater responsibility than to advocate for our health, safety, and welfare. We made a difficult commitment to make it happen effectively and as fiscally responsible as possible, even though it was an expensive project and labor-intensive. I'd be remiss right now to not give credit to our radio fiscal oversight work group and later our fiscal oversight team that included the commissioners, the county manager, the controller, Mayor Harris, Supervisor Bob Jackson, and initially Mayor Stanley. And I can see Chief Holland back there in the corner smiling right now at this achievement. The end result was last week we turned on the system for law enforcement and the operation is going extremely well. We have come in close to budget despite no contingency in the numbers we were handed and significant land development and leasing issues with the radio towers. Although the new Human Services building may be a close second, again, I think this will probably be our greatest achievement. In emergency management, we maintain the burden of an emergency radio system, but the statutory burden on making or ensuring that residents have emergency response is on the municipalities. A lot of people don't realize that. As you heard me say before, we are headed toward a volunteer emergency service tsunami. Due to decreasing volunteerism, cost and hours of training, cost of equipment and workman's comp, and Adams County is certainly not immune to this. The loss of our volunteer service would result in paid professionals and cost to taxpayers that would skyrocket dramatically. That's why we need to think more in terms of regionalization and consolidation for emergency services to control cost and make sure we have effective service for our residents. When WellSpan announced they were getting out of the ALS business, everyone asked, what are we going to do now? But when no one did anything. I took the lead and went to Gettysburg WellSpan president and convened a meeting with WellSpan, ACVISA, COG, members Bob Gordon and Barb Underwood, and our legislators. That led to the Adams County Emergency Service Steering Committee, which I chaired with members of COG, ACVISA, and Gettysburg and Hanover Hospital. When Hanover Hospital decided to stay in the ALS business, that actually dissipated, but it did start a valuable conversation. When the talk stalled, Gettysburg, New Oxford, and Bonneville began a consolidation that formed Adams Regional EMS. ARMS is supplying BLS service to 14 municipalities and AOS to 18, including where we sit tonight in this community. I was honored to be asked to be on the board of directors of ARMS. In my opinion, ARMS, combined with necessity, will be a springboard for EMS regionalization in Adams County. Beside the municipal departments, you may not realize that Adams County Sheriff Department, Courthouse Security, Probation, and Prison have 110 staff that needs to be firearms trained and qualified. I didn't realize that when I walked in the door. The need for a dedicated law enforcement specific range has been discussed for over 15 years. When I walked in the door, I huddled up with the sheriff and the Adams County Law Enforcement Association to figure out how to make that happen. I came up with a public-private partnership idea to take the tax to residents off the table so we could concentrate on administration, land development, and zoning issues. It was not an easy task, but we are through zoning, land development, and we are breaking ground this Friday morning beside the 911 center. In conclusion, whether it's the 911 emergency radio system, working to regionalize and consolidate emergency services, I have been at the forefront of these initiatives, and I'm proud to say this board has done a stellar job of recognizing and supporting these initiatives.
Thank you, Randy. Marty, same question, please.
And I'll start off by agreeing with Harry that county government is a continuum, and none of us exist in a vacuum. So the 911 center was a great concept. It was a very good partnership with ACVISA. You know, laying the groundwork for different organizations is important, and it's important for future boards to follow in on those. I would say that, again, back to my introduction, you know, my number one priority as a father is the protection of my family. When you become a county commissioner, that is your number one priority. If you are an elected official in a municipal, that is your number one priority. To put this in, I tried to look around the room real quick to fill in a scenario here of why doing that 911 radio project is so important and supporting our emergency responders is so important. If there's a fire in that kitchen right now, or if there are gunshots in that kitchen right now, we will have probably at least one volunteer in the room run that way. We'll have Chief Holloman run that way. The rest of us are going to go that way. Mr. Peterson is going to help us get that way without, as a fireplace officer, without running over each other. On the county level, what would then happen is Randy would help with the press, because you always have to have somebody that is dealing with the press after an incident. And, well, he might run that way too, but the idea being that we all have a part to play. And in county government, you often overlook that is the basics of what you must do. What we have done, you know, we have a 911 radio project that's on. We almost hit a sweet spot in that regard that, truthfully, I believe if the previous board had pulled the trigger on the $27 million project as it was, they would have overbuilt the project. If we had pushed it back, the expenses would have gone up. We hit a spot where the interest rates were right where they needed to be. You know, learning strange things like the price of steel mattered significantly. If we had delayed too long, that would have cost more. You know, we later found out that the expense of removing rock would have been there no matter what we did. That was a fun lesson to learn. But the 911 project is by far the most important thing we have done. I'll echo Randy's comments on the firing range. You know, when I was a borough council member in Gettysburg, and I learned from the chief of police that they had a firing range inside the building, up on the third floor, I think. And they're like, so they can practice night shooting. I'm like, that's ridiculous. That is no way to coordinate services. And then when we had learned how many people within the county government had to take training, the number that jumped out to me was the number of federal people that that are required to take training who live in Adams County, which of course none of us know where they are located, right around the corner here. But all these people have training, and creating a facility that overlaps the local, the state, the federal need was very important, and it was an important exercise, and I think this will be a significant training opportunity, which was the original intention of that 911 facility, was to provide training. See this as an outside training ground. So it's going to be much better than what we've had in the past. I'm looking forward to it. There might even come a day, well, I won't be able to use that facility, but there might come a day where I actually fire a handgun. So, just not at that facility. One of the things that we have done that I thought was very important, and is the municipal officials will understand this more than most. Our planning office, working with the Council of Governments and Act Visa to work on a fire study. We have a lot of resources at the county, especially when it comes to planning. And we are not afraid to put those in to helping our municipalities. Randy had mentioned, municipalities pay the bill. We're in charge of making sure the calls go out and running 911. The volunteers, thankfully, exist, or else this system overall would be a huge tax burden for people. So we have to do what we can to keep them there. One of the things we've done was do the fire study with the Council of Governments. It has resulted in some communities realizing what the actual costs are to their residents and finding funding streams for that. In the future, I'd like to use our planning office to start looking at some of these, they're called Tier 1 or Tier 2 chemical facilities, like Miller Chemical. When that fire happened, a creek was almost destroyed. We've got to do a better job of plotting out where they are and coming up with plans on how to deal with an emergency that hits those and their effect on our local environment. To me, that is equally important as an emergency, not just our people, but our physical environment. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, three, for answering those three questions. We're down to question number 4, and we were trying to keep this down to like 90 minutes, so 4 may be our last question. And this is going to be directed toward Randy. You lucked out to start again. Okay, question 4 is, as you are all aware, the county commissioners are responsible for the county's budget and finances. The budget as a fiscal document, financial document, is probably the most important policy-making tool available to provide you with the administrative and legislative control over county operations. Again, a 4-part question, not to take 4 minutes. What was the financial status of the county when you took office? The second part is, were there any issues? If so, what were they? Part 3, did you resolve these issues? And part 4, what is the financial status of the county in the last year of your term? Randy?
Yes, sir. When we walked in the door, the county could be deemed in financially fair to good shape. The bond rating was A. There was approximately $43 million in debt that was incurred from previous boards, because we just walked in the door. As we sit here today, through the efforts of the board, the county manager, and several department directors, we have an all-important county bond rating that has increased twice to AA3, which is the highest it has ever been. This is a critical factor in borrowing money for lower interest rates. The total debt is $63 million, up from the $43 million we inherited, largely due to the $20 million we borrowed as a portion of the radio project. The need to borrow for the radio project was somewhat offset due to our excellent relationship and communication with our legislators to the tune of $3.25 million. And since then, we've gotten a $1 million RCAP and $500,000 for the same reasons. It should be noted that when we needed to borrow money for the radio project, we refinanced the existing debt to a much lower interest rate and saved the taxpayers $70,000 a year on that debt. Thank goodness for lower interest rates. A challenging issue continues to be for the budget. We are still in economic recovery that does not promise to let up anytime soon. That means flat revenues with increasing expenses, which creates a challenge. I think the board has done a good job in meeting that challenge. My initial observation when I started with the county was that county government overall is rather thrifty. That department directors have been asked to cut to the bone year after year. I have to admit, after 4 years, that our county staff gets it, and I'd like to commend them. When it comes to budget and understanding the difficult economy, they understand. Beside the difficult economy, at the very end of the good economic times in the mid-2000s, county voters passed a referendum to spend $10 million on land preservation. That fact is mentioned over and over and over again by a small group of individuals. What is not mentioned is that no board, including that board that was in office at the time, ever designated, earmarked, or budgeted any funding for the $10 million. Also never mentioned is the fact that as of today, $10.9 million has been spent. Yep, I said $10.9 million has been spent on various land preservation programs, and this board has honored every commitment that was made to preserve land over the past 4 years. Since 2012, $2.9 million, as I mentioned, used to preserve over 5,000 acres at a cost of $2,100 per acre. Again, I say it's not about how much money you spend, it's how effective you spend it and what you get for it. Overall, there's an excellent working relationship between the commissioners, county manager, finance department, and directors in the budget process. And we even instituted a county finance review team, which Commissioner Qualley mentioned earlier, which he led. The results speak for itself even in a depressed economy. We have greatly improved infrastructure. We've talked about some of that tonight. We have completed several large and critical projects. We have a balanced budget, no tax increase for the second year, and have improved our bond rating twice to the highest rating in history. The board is very proud of our fiscal accomplishments, and we have every intention of continuing that same initiative in the future.
Thank you. Marty?
Well, when we talk about taking office, I'm actually going to go a year prior to being a commissioner because I was a county auditor for a year prior to becoming a county commissioner. When we took over the county, I think overall the finances were doing pretty well. And I do actually have to compliment the previous board and the county manager on this, that they did see the concerns and they started to turn the ship around. The bond rating was good, as Randy had said. Reserves were good. The debt was at an acceptable level, still a little bit high, but acceptable on an overall scheme. The real challenge was poor cash flow. Randy had mentioned in one aspect, the preservation, how they had funded that. A lot of that was done by robbing the general fund. The previous boards did not want to borrow anything. So what they did was they used cash for everything. And, you know, I often do that at home. I would prefer not to have a credit card at all. I'd also prefer not to have a mortgage on my house, but I don't have the cash on hand to buy my house. So sometimes you have to deal with debt. The other problem was by robbing the general fund to get some of these projects completed, they were keeping wages low. When we took office, there were years of 0 increase and 1% increases. It was increasing the unionization of some of our offices, which directly impact the budget because pay goes up very quickly, negotiation and legal fees go up very quickly because your staff are no longer happy. Often they find out after forming the union that they're still not happy and they're paying a lot in union dues, but that is a question that is not coming up tonight. We had an outdated computer system. They simply would not replace it. It was too large of a price tag. We had vehicles that were falling apart. They would not buy new vehicles. We just chose that we would finance vehicles. We would spread that cost over a couple of years. And one thing that was particularly disturbing to me, because it highlighted a dramatic disconnect within the courthouse, was a slow but consistent and deliberate undermining of the courts. When we took some tours of different offices, and you walk into the planning office and they have all brand new stuff, multiple monitors, great office, you know, effective, what you want to see in county government. Then you walk in a probation office, and literally you have chairs that were, you know, they look like they were from the 70s. They're rickety. I mean, I could knock one over. They did not want to have people sitting in them. Or someone had, you know, I look at their desk and they have a brand new computer monitor. I'm like, well, that's great. And they go, well, that's not yours. That's not the county's. That's mine. Staff were actually buying their own monitors because the other ones were giving them headaches. So they would take the old one. They said, yours is in the closet. When I leave, I'm taking my monitor with me. That sort of a bifurcation was disturbing to me. So we've moved forward on this. We've taken some advice from our staff. We've taken advice from our bond counsel to make sure we're making prudent decisions. Randy had mentioned the old debt. We refinanced some of the old debt. Some of that old debt is going back to paying for a road at Gateway Gettysburg, goes back to the prison project. By refinancing that with our better, lower interest rates, we're saving $70,000 a year. That's cash that can go back into the general fund. That is cash that is not requiring tax increases for. We paid down the Ag Center's mortgage to save on our rent costs. We purchased a new building that will again reduce our annual expenses.